Hello and welcome to the Herald's Unspun Live Politics podcast. I'm your host this week, Hannah Brown, and today we're diving into a pretty pressing issue, I think. The political engagement of Scotland's youngest voters. We're joined by Eddie Barnes, Director of the John Smith Centre at the University of Glasgow, which has just released groundbreaking research on 16 and 17-year-olds' attitudes towards politics. The findings are eye-opening. 2/3 of these young voters feel overwhelmingly unprepared for elections, citing confusion and a lack of clarity about the political system. This research also couldn't be any timelier, as the UK government has recently extended voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds nationwide. Yet many of these potential voters describe politics as confusing, complicated, even boring. Eddie will help us unpack what this means for the future of civic engagement and how educators and policymakers can bridge this gap. Let's hear from him now. Eddie Barnes, thank you very much for joining us on Unspun Live, the Herald's Politics podcast. The John Smith Centre, which you're the director of, has recently done new polling around 16 and 17-year-olds. Can you explain a wee bit about what you've been up to?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we obviously 16 and 17-year-olds have had the vote in Scotland for some time, but I guess there's been a bit more attention on them across the UK now that the news has come through that the franchise will be extended right across the UK. We started looking at this around the time of the Hamilton by-election a few weeks back, and we went out and just thought we will go and try and speak to some 16 and 17-year-olds who had the opportunity to vote in that by-election to see if they weren't voting and then why they weren't voting. And what struck us was a couple of encounters we had with 16, 17-year-olds who weren't voting. And when they said why, it was actually quite rational. And what they said was, well, I don't know anything about politics, and therefore why would I vote? You know, in the same way that, you know, if I don't know how to drive a car, why would I get behind the wheel? Yeah, it was a perfectly rational, quite a moral choice actually. They just felt that, you know, since I don't know anything about this, I will volunteer to disenfranchise myself because almost out of a sense of responsibility that they shouldn't take part. So that kind of interaction when you were kind of speaking to young people in the streets inspired this? That was right. So we thought, well, that's interesting because that surprised us. And you know, sometimes you think, oh, is it because young people are rejecting politics or are apathetic? This was something different, and we thought, well, why don't we test this and do some polling? So at the centre, we do quite a lot of research to understand what young people are thinking. You know, our job is to get young people interested, involved in politics. So we want to know what it is that's blocking them potentially, and how do we get around that. So we asked a series of questions, and the poll has just come back. It's published in the Herald this week. Thank you very much. We should say exclusively in the Herald. In the Herald, nowhere else. Correct. Only in the best papers. And it has actually validated that kind of anecdote that we. So what are the main findings? So the main findings for us was young people feel quite unprepared when it comes to this idea of suddenly they know they're getting the vote, and you know, I think most of them think it's a reasonable idea, but they don't feel prepared to take that vote. They don't have, if you like, the political literacy, to use the phrase, to exercise an informed choice. So, for example, you know, 2/3 said they did not feel prepared by their schools when it came to voting. Of those who said they were not going to vote, the most likely reason, or the most given reason, was that they don't know enough about politics. They just simply, you know, didn't feel qualified as the teenagers we spoke to in Hamilton. They just don't think, well, I don't know enough about this, so I'm not going to get involved. And then we asked them that kind of classic question where you say, well, give us one word that you think about politics. What's the one word that comes to mind? And the biggest word that came back was confusing. You know, so it's not divisive or toxic. It's just, I don't really get this thing called politics. I don't really understand it. And therefore, many of them, according to the polling we're doing, not all of them, but many of them are choosing just to opt out. And that was something that we thought is quite interesting, given that, you know, we have this large new cohort of voters now across the UK, and understanding what it is that is blocking them, motivating them from getting involved in the voting, getting involved in civic life and public life, I think is important for us to understand.
I mean, Have you done polling like this before? We know that the John Smith Centre kind of focuses on young people and engagement with politics. Did this shock you when these results came out, or were they expected?
I think it's as I say, it surprised us. I think you come to this with assumptions, don't you? And I think there's a lot of assumptions being made at the moment about Gen Z. That this is a kind of uniquely anxious generation, switched off, disaffected, disillusioned. A lot of chat around at the moment about Gen Z kind of going towards strongman politics, backing dictatorship over democracy. And I guess what we're trying to do is say, okay, that's the chat, that's a lot of what's being said, but let's look at it, let's actually analyse it and see if we can separate the kind of wheat from the chaff. And I think what this polling exercise did, as I say, is demonstrating that it's not necessarily anger or antipathy or apathy that is necessarily blocking the path from young people getting involved in civic life. It's just a basic lack of understanding. It's a kind of, I don't get this. I don't really know what's going on. I think I'll just opt out. And, we can get into this, but I think one of the conclusions we draw, therefore, is that having better civics education in schools, and schools are very hard pressed and it's always wary to demand yet more from them. But I think it is something that has now got its time. If we are giving young people the vote, and now that's the case across the UK, that's fine, but it really is only, a small part of the job if we really want an engaged, a group of new generation coming through. What you need clearly we think clearly from this polling is education that says to young people, here's how it works, here's how the system actually operates, and here's how you can play a part in it. Give them some sense of agency. And then they might actually say, okay, right, well, I will take part then, I will use my vote, because I now understand the system that we're operating in. Yeah,
it's one thing to say, here's the vote, but if you don't equip people with the right tools, what's the point?
That's right, exactly. And that I think is, from the polling exercise, that's how a lot of young people see it. They those of us who are in the bubble maybe are taking a lot of things for granted. But it's important just to do the basics, just to explain, your vote is counted the same as every other person's vote. There is no qualifications to voting, we give the vote to everybody, leaving aside whether they have a degree in politics or nothing. So you are just as qualified as anybody else. Here's how the system works. Here's how we elect people. Here's how your vote counts. Here's how it has really mattered. And here's how to distinguish, something that is disinformation from real information, just to get young people to understand and give them that kind of literacy, as I say, about how the system operates, so that they can say, right, now I get it. I'd like to take part in this.
I want to kind of drill in a wee bit more to what you think civic education should look like at schools a wee bit. But before we go into that, can we look at the numbers a wee bit more? There's an interesting thing, I think, that came up with the gender divide amongst young people. I think young women in particular felt more overwhelmed by the system. I mean, was there anything to suggest that why that was the case? One of the findings?
I think the first thing I'd say on the gender thing is yes, there are definitely differences. In some ways, though, they are kind of at the margins. So in some ways the similarities between young men and young women are more pertinent than the differences. But you're right to say that there are differences. I mean, when we've polled previously young women on things like how the state of mind, state of happiness, then there's definitely a greater sense of anxiety amongst young women than there is amongst young men. So I think that's something that we should bear in mind. That, and there's no question that it is those it's groups like maybe young women who feel the system doesn't represent them particularly well. They don't see role models. They see a system that is kind of quite male dominated. That is only going to make them feel even more alienated from getting involved, and combined with that sense of anxiety as well. And then I think that is another argument for better education, so that you can actually reach some of these groups, be it young women, be it ethnic minorities, be it young people in socially excluded backgrounds who again will feel, well, it's not for me, to say actually it is absolutely for you.
Because I'm a decade or so older than the 16 or 17 year olds that you were polling, but something that stuck out to me as well with what you were looking at was the social media element. I think one of the questions you asked, please correct me if I'm wrong, was around, would you trust social media more than traditional news to get your intake of the news? And I think it was quite striking the amount of people that said social media. Could that level of anxiety be driven by social media as well? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I was just looking at the numbers. So 49% say they trust social media more for reliable information than traditional media, and 41% disagree. So yes, there's just about agreement that, and social media is where the younger generation. It's no great surprise, but it is where young people are going. On the anxiety issue, and again, like, I wonder how much this is people like me in my middle age, kind of transplanting my anxieties onto younger generation, because we polled this, and when we ask people young people what is it that makes them anxious, social media is actually quite a long way down. What makes them anxious is like not having a job, or not being able to get a house,
cost of living,
and the sense that as they're leaving education, there isn't actually a country out there that's giving them stability and prosperity. So I would we all can all have views about what the impact social media is having. I don't think it's particularly good, but I think for the average young person, I think they see it as both good and bad. They get the fact that they're gaining information, through their phones every day, means has the potential, obviously, for them feeling more informed. Maybe there's a bit of anxiety. We did some of the focus groups we did. This brought through where there's that sense of being always on. You can never you can never detach yourself, because on a phone you're always seeing whatever the latest kind of horror story is that's blowing up around the world, in a way that we just you just didn't have 30, 40 years ago.
Doom scrolling is a thing.
Correct. Now. Doom scrolling. So I think that there's certainly that. All I would say is I just think it's certainly the feedback we got from young people is that it's good and bad, and they're quite aware of that, and they're grappling with how do they kind of manage that. A lot of them saying, I know I need to kind of switch off, so I'm not just spending my entire life driving myself into anxiety by doom scrolling, as you say.
And plus they'll probably be a lot more savvy than other generations in these things, so they know how to manage and handle it.
It really is. Yeah.
So when we're looking at this civic education stuff, Eddie, what does that look like? Because people might think, okay, well, we do have modern studies classes at school. What do you think it should look like?
So I think there's real basics. There's like, here's how election works. Yeah. Like here's how the election day happens. Here's what the franchise is. Here's how Parliament is made up. So there's just that basic kind of stuff. I think there's a we should be talking about how the history of democracies, and why it is that we think that democracy is a better system of government than, for example, dictatorship. I suppose that is a little bit like modern studies, but it's a good argument for us to be making, and important to kind of get these issues raised again. And then
just before we go on that one, I think the poll showed some really interesting things around the dictatorship kind of question, or what would you prefer? Do you think democracy is the best rule? It was something along those lines. You probably got.
So we got I haven't looked at it. So they asked if democracy was a better form of government than dictatorship. 59% agreed, only 11% disagreed. Again, there's a slight kind of gender difference. So young men were more likely to disagree with that statement than young women, and that's been found in other polls when we've asked this dictatorship or democracy question. It's broad agreement, probably prefer democracy, but young men would be more likely to say to back dictatorship than young women. And that feeds into something, I think, it's definitely a kind of feature, and there's a lot of chat about this, that maybe young men are more kind of prone to supporting the kind of more kind of authoritarian, rule, strong man, the Trump kind of figure. And I think from memory, in the big poll that we did, the big youth poll we did back in March, I think it was something like 29% who said they would favour dictatorship over democracy. That's quite a big number.
Wow, yeah.
And I think it shows that whilst there is still support for democracy, it's kind of on notice, and it's a little bit transactional. I think there's a lot of young people who are saying, fine, I'll back it, but what am I getting for what am I getting for in return here? And
there's also that 25% that said that they didn't know, which I thought was quite concerning. But I mean, I'm not a pollster, I'm not dealing with
and it's
numbers.
always important to look at the don't knows, because we tend to just ignore all that. But it goes back to this core point that we're raising with this poll, is this lack of knowledge, lack of certainty and awareness that maybe is the thing that's driving people from not getting engaged. And so I think that's the kind of the don't know thing is very important. I think I'm just looking, because there was I think I'm right in saying, sorry, just flicking through this.
No, go for it.
That when we asked about how they would vote, young people, the biggest chunk was essentially those who don't know who to support. So a third of young people said, well, no, not a clue. Labour was the most popular choice, but only 16%.
It's low.
So it's tiny. So actually the plurality of young people are like, well, yeah, I'll vote, but I don't really know who for.
And so you're left with this kind of gaping hole of, okay, they're going to the polls, but we have no idea what they're going to do when they're in that polling station. They don't know. The old, those old tribal attachments have completely gone. The idea that you grew up in a Labour house or an SNP house, that may be true for a few of us still, but I think that's gone now, and we're seeing this fracturing now of the two-party system as well. So if you're a young person growing up now, you don't have that feeling of, well, I grew up in a Labour house. It's more likely it's like walking down a high street. There's various shops, and you don't really understand what they're selling, and you're being told you have to go into one of them, and you're like, well, 7 or 8 shops here. I don't know. It's quite understandable. Probably go into the one that you see first.
Yes, which in the case of social media at the moment is Reform. Because they are, no question, have got the best social media game of all the main parties, and it comes up time and again. That the one people that young people do, the one person that they see, for good or bad, is Nigel Farage on TikTok.
And their engagement as well on TikTok and platforms like that, they've got thousands of followers based on parties that feel almost quite fledgling to the new systems of social media. And TikTok, I think, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, all the mainstream parties started going on these platforms. So it's almost like Reform has had a bit of a head start on these things. Looking, I guess, at that democracy thing, because I think that's also really interesting, that you would assume that would be an easy question for people to answer. Of course, democracy over any other rule, but it's not. So that would be a part of the educational, I guess, curriculum. You'd like to see more about what democracy means, how you define it. Would it be a separate class then?
I think so. The better people to speak to about for me, there's an organisation called the Association for Citizenship Education, which actually provides kind of curriculum kind of papers, teaching aids for teachers just to pick up. And I think we talk about civics education. It's not really the one thing I would push back on here is a lot of people say, oh no, we don't want this because we don't want schools being politicised. It's the last thing you want is yet more bloody politics in schools, where kids at least finally, before they have to come into the world. This is not about politicising children and saying, you've got to, before you leave this class, you've got to sign onto either one of Labour, SNP, Tory, whatever.
Bringing back those old household establishments.
That's not, that's absolutely not what we're talking about here. We are talking about just giving them some understanding of the basics around how a voting system works, why we think democracy is a good thing, what your rights are, as a citizen, and building some political, and I go back to this slightly wonky phrase, the idea of political and media literacy. So you can say, right, let's look at disinformation, the kind of stuff that young people are seeing on their phones every day, and how do you distinguish between something that is fake and real, and how do you educate yourself so that you're able to distinguish that and make an informed choice when it comes to voting. I think overriding all of this, it's about giving young people a sense of agency as well. Like, it's about saying to them, you can take part in this, and you can make a difference. And by taking part, you are able, you are a small part of a bigger system that enables you to make change happen. And and I think that's the important message for me that's coming out of this, is that because that then is saying to those young people, in whatever you choose to do in your future life, you have some agency in whatever it is. You can go off and work in business and actually, and create a great company and employ people and add to the general, wealth of the economy, or you can go and work in the charitable sector and change that too. And so it's not just, we're not trying to create here, or saying we should create a kind of new generation of politicians. You're actually saying, use this votes at 16 that we're now saying we're giving to young people to say, right, you are now active participants in this country. You can, just as anybody else, make change happen. Here's some examples of how to do that, how you can do that, and hopefully, as a result of that, we can actually create a new generation of young people who feel that they can lead and be active participants in society, and not just sit back and be passive recipients of whatever's coming at them.
I think you put it really well in your op-ed for the Herald recently, Eddie. You compared the people that you spoke to in Hamilton to people who had never been behind the wheel before of a car. So it's almost like, and then asking them to drive, but how are they expected to drive if they don't know how to drive the car? It's almost like giving them their driving theory of politics, isn't it?
It is a bit. And as I say, not just politics, about citizenship and, the fact that, so we go into schools as an organisation, we're starting to go into schools, and one of the things that we're trying to just simply say is, it's not some kind of weird, separate class of people who go to a different school to you and who have gone into the secret kind of society that ensures that they're the ones that run the country. It's the same people as you. They started off like you did, in a school in the west of Scotland, and they simply chose to use their education to then get involved and go about running the country, or running a business, or running whatever it is, and taking ownership, taking leadership. And so I think that's what that's what we need. It's not, as I say, it's not just about saying politics is the be all and end all. It's really, I think what we're saying here is, as I say, use the votes at 16 opportunity to give young people a sense of agency.
Do you think decision makers will listen to this call for civic education to be rolled out across?
Well, it's interesting. I doubt it. I think there's a lot of pressure on schools as it stands, and adding in yet more into a curriculum is difficult. I think they should. I think it's. I think there's loads of demand for it from the young people we speak to. They really enjoy this kind of stuff as well. There's been a lot of work done, I know, in the Scottish Parliament from MSPs who feel this is important, and I don't think they've made huge progress. It's at the moment it's very patchy. So we know that some schools are doing really, really well, other schools less so. And I think so. More work, I think, to begin with, needs to be done on what's actually happening, and what the provision is, and then I certainly like to see it happening, but whether it does or not,
remains to be seen.
Yes.
Well, at least with the polling that you've all done, it shows how important the right to vote is, and it's not just a gift; it's a fundamental right that you're giving people.
Exactly.
And that's all we've got time for on Unspun Live. Please remember to follow and subscribe, and check out the latest news and events on heraldscotland.com.